Welcome to the Visionary Chronicles, a business strategy podcast where we provide insight to those looking for creative, executable strategies built around the latest disruptive ideas, innovative cultures, product creators, and marketing solutions. Today in the Visionary Chronicles, we're going to extend our conversation on marketing metrics. We find that to be a very important subject that we talk about quite frequently with the brands we work with Liquid Mind. At all levels, startup, mid-cap, large cap, whatever it happens to be, even established brands don't necessarily know how to determine the return on investment with marketing. It's always been this big question with all brands is, how do we definitively and financially and tangibly determine our return on our investment? And most, if not all, have come up with their own formulas. And so what I'm going to talk about today are, through Liquid Mind and also brands that I've been with, the most common metrics that these marketing departments utilize in order to determine their return on the investment. So we'll talk about several formulas today, and we'll also talk about what those tangible metrics are exactly. So we know that marketing metrics do matter. Most people will say, yes, it does matter. But depending on who you talk to, the metrics of how that gets measured is different. So they're an essential contribution to defining brand ROI. So they always want to be able to fit that neatly into a formula of brand equity increase, also tangible return on the investment, on sponsorship, whatever it happens to be. They need to define what that looks like. So it's not only for past investments that we've made, but it's also for future budgeting purposes. What do we put against a particular type of spend? And whether that be TV, ads, social media, all of these have different metrics and measurements, and some are more tangible than others. With social media, we've had a little bit more tangible ability to measure the metrics. But as soon as you start getting through the weeds a little bit with social media, it becomes less and less tangible for you to measure the metrics of your return on the investment. So what they do is they establish this marketing discipline, this decision-making, investment analysis, assessing the effectiveness of critical activities, and validating how these business, what they call outcomes, are achieved. So at the front end of analyzing metrics, you have to understand you need to define expectations and objectives for your investments. So when the investment is eventually spent, you know what metric you're looking for, what dashboard you're measuring it against during the campaigns, during the investments, during the sponsorships, and then you can pivot while you're making these investments to ones that are working, ones that aren't working. And then post-investment for future spends, you know what did work and what didn't work. So it's not a matter of just throwing money at a board and saying, hey, let's go do social media posts. Hey, we got some great impressions. Hey, we got some great click-through percentages. But at the end of the day, all that really matters to the company, the brand, the investors, and the financial team is, did we generate revenue? So that is by far the most important metric that every brand and company will use. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we get close to the dartboard of, hey, how do these metrics measure against what you're going to be looking at to achieve revenue increase? And did the spend actually show the results you were expecting on the front end when you were doing your marketing strategy? So that's an important aspect of brands. And when we work with Liquid Mind, the first thing that we do with brands is, number one, set a budget. Number two, that you're looking to set expectations of what you're looking to achieve as a brand. It's not enough to say, hey, we want to do 5 social media posts. Hey, we want to have that split between Facebook, Twitter. We want to start a TikTok account. But if all of these are just things that are being thrown against the dartboard, if there's really not any overriding strategy of how it's going to increase brand equity, increase revenue, or a particular expectation to be measured against, why are you doing it? So these are things that we look at from a strategic standpoint, as too many brands don't have a definitive strategy of how not only are they going to measure ROI, but more importantly, what is the strategy on the front end? So you're measuring it throughout the campaigns and throughout the sponsorships, so that then post-investment, you can know if you've got the proper return on investment against your expectations. So again, we know they matter, but what do they look like and how are we trying to achieve those? So it's how we determine, assess, and manage these metrics that build an effective marketing strategy. So that provides this tangible brand equity benefits and a realized ROI. So when I say a realized ROI, there are going to be different formulas that we'll use for marketing. And there's different avenues of where we spend money. We spend them on peer campaigns. We spend them on funnel metrics in order to drive traffic. And then we also build it off of, hey, pure brand awareness. How do we measure these things? So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. So the first thing in building what I call this roadmap. So the podcast that they were talking about is marketing metrics, developing a roadmap. So the first thing in building your roadmap is determining the most critical data points to construct an analysis of your brand investment value. Okay, I say value. And the reason I say value is because it isn't like, hey, you go into a store and you purchase product. It's a hard good or it's a soft good. I talked this on the CPG side with Liquid Mind. And what we're talking about here is a lot of times is value growth of the brand itself. How do you measure that? So when we look at these metric data point, what we call analysis, here's some of the measuring points that we look like. These metrics impact revenue, the P&L, or the brand equity value, the goodwill, the balance sheet. So you got a P&L impact and you got a balance sheet impact through brand equity value and goodwill. And some of these are more tangible, others are not. The second thing we look at in a broad metric analysis, do the metrics define the past or the future, meaning lifetime value? And past is previous analysis to determine long-term lifetime value for future investments. The third is, are the metrics static? Meaning, is it just a period demand generation, or are they dynamic? They're ongoing. They have a demand build over time. So what we look at is the roadmap to the value of defining these marketing metrics, okay? So the ones I just went through, these metrics impact revenue or brand equity, goodwill, metrics define past or the future, metrics static or dynamic. These are all kind of metric data point analysis that will be built around defining the value increase. So the roadmap to value defining marketing metrics are built off a couple points and a couple metrics that we look at that as we move along these investments for a period of time or long term, these are things that we need to keep in mind. So the first thing is, if it's a campaign, we have campaign metrics, right? It's effectiveness, ROI through click-through rates and visits. That'd be one. We have satisfaction metrics, number two, which is customer satisfaction through what they call net promoter score, or revenue. Okay, so people get confused with this net promoter score. I could have a separate podcast on this alone, because it's very important that a brand be very proactive with asking their consumers if they are satisfied with the purchase. So as you go through analyzing the purchase cycle or the life cycle purchase of your products, you may think it's a great experience, but your customer may think differently. They may think less of your brand, may think less of what you're providing to them as value. So the net promoter score is really something that you're getting feedback from your consumer as they go through this life cycle purchase with your brand or your company. So that's an important thing on satisfaction metric. The third is brand metrics. So we talk about brand affinity or brand equity value increase. That's the third piece. The fourth piece is customer acquisition and attrition. Now you get more tangible, right? So it's the process to determine customer churn rates. It could either be increasing or decreasing, attrition or acquisition. It's very clear, very definitive, but that's the fourth metric on the roadmap to building this value of defining marketing metrics. And then there's corporate metrics, right? The president of the company, the CMOs, the CFOs, they love this number. It was this enterprise value translation through corporate culture, HR, potential M&A value. So if they're getting purchased or if they're looking to acquire another company, these are things that are very important to the company as a whole because it increased overall brand value. So those are the four things we looked at: campaign metrics, satisfaction metrics, brand metrics, customer acquisition, attrition metric, corporate metrics. Okay, so those are, let's see, 5 different areas on the roadmap of value. Okay, so these are things we'll talk about. So in order to define these metrics, or determine them, in other words, you're going to need some things to allow you to do that. So these marketing investment performances tracking, such as promos, is a great one. Campaigns is another one. And then you need to determine and measure the outcome and compare it to expectations. And this is where it's very important, and many brands fall short, is they don't have a strategy or expectation or objective on the front end. They just tell marketing to go spend it. Well, wait a minute. Before you spend it, define what we're looking to achieve as a result of that spend. That's why it's very important that you have that strategy in place. So what is our metric? Click-through, customer visits. Do the results justify the investment? How effective and efficient was marketing strategy? So all these things are going to be post-investment, but they have to be done before the investment is made. So it's very important that that happens. So there's several areas of when we talk about what does this return on investment formula look like. Many people use different types of metrics in calculating the spend on the marketing side. So we'll talk about some tangible and intangible metrics. But the first and probably the most popular one you'll see out there is this marketing ROI. So it's called MROI. Great acronym, right? So it's MROI. So what it is in the calculation for the marketing return on spend is taking the period, a definitive period of when you start your investment and when you end your investment. So let's say in the start of the investment, we were doing, let's say $1 million. And then as a result and end of the period of when we made the marketing spend, we now went from $1 million to $1.5 million. So we've now defined that there was an incremental, what they call incremental revenue boost during the spend period. So that is your incremental revenue. And what you then look at is what is your company's margin as a whole, whether it be a service company, whether it be a product company. If it's 50% gross, 75% gross, what's your COGS, what's your service expense? Find out what your contribution margin is. So let's just say it's 50%. So we've got a $500,000 incremental revenue increase times 50%. So you got $250,000. And let's say your spend was $100,000 for that incremental revenue increase. So you subtract that out, and then this calculates your marketing return on investment of 15% in this case. So that's the most common one used, and it's called a total MROI. So it's really a definitive and tangible number. You know, there are other things you could look at as the actual impact of the incremental revenue increase that marketing spend had. So you can look at different ways. So that's the first one and probably the most common. Now, there's another one called funnel MROI, which is if there's some type of campaign you're doing, how do you define that? So I'll just give you an example here. So let's assume a campaign costs $30,000. It generates 6,000 views on the video. So historical, you need to then define what that historical tracking of these views is on qualified leads. And let's just say in this instance that, let's say there's 12 views over a 6-week period, and those become qualified leads, let's say to the sales department. And 10% of that amount will contribute to revenue within 9 months, let's just say 6 to 9 months, which equals 72 sales in this case. At a profit of $500 a sale, you have $36 in revenue. So the funnel MRI is the $36,000 in revenue minus the spend divided by the spend, which is a 20% MRI. Okay, so that's a funnel MROI. So there's a lot of numbers I threw out there, but we work with that at Liquid Mind all the time because we want to make sure that we understand as we do future spends what the past look like and where we can pivot to where we have the most profitability. So that's the second most common one is a funnel MRI. And then you've got a customer equity MRI as well. So this is kind of what they call a customer retention, attrition valuation. So I'll give you a quick example here of how this works on customer equity MRI. And this is for a bank that was having, the issue is that they were having a 20% attrition rate of customers and they wanted to reduce it to 17%. So the calculation here is that they had 10,000 customers at a $2,000 annual profit per customer. So that's the kind of the metrics of the formula itself. So based on their current attrition rate of 20%, they're going to invest $4 million in this case. So we worked with a bank and they were going to invest $4 million and they wanted to reduce the attrition rate to 17%. So based on this formula, and this was a formula to utilize to ask the question, should we make the investment and what's the return going to look like? So what you look at before is 10,000 customers times $2,000 divided by 20% equals $100 million in current customer value or current customer equity, let's say. And your intention here is that after you've still got the 10,000 customers times the $2,000, but now you're moving the attrition rate from 20 to 17. So now it becomes $117 million customer equity MROI. So when we were working with this bank, that was the first number that we looked at was, okay, well, if we make this $4 million investment, you're going to get a $17 million return. So what we looked at was we have a 17.6, in this case, a $17.6 million increase minus the $4 million marketing spend divided by the $4 million marketing spend. It gave us a 340% MROI. So obviously it was an easy decision to make to put the $4 million into finding a way to reduce the attrition rate from 20 to 17%. It may not seem like that much until you put those numbers on the board, which was significant. So the three that we have are the MROI, the funnel MROI, and then the customer equity MROI. So these marketing metrics needed to be combined with other metrics. So still the most important ones are revenue growth, number one, far and away, so which realizes a tangible MROI and customer satisfaction through a net promoter score. And so the other ones, when you go through these formulas we're talking about, the marketing team can measure the value of brand equity growth through, there's, let's see, 7 or 8 different areas: brand awareness, brand consideration, brand preference, brand quality and point of difference, brand affinity, brand positioning, brand culture. So these are areas that they can measure brand equity value growth. And then in looking at the marketing metrics, a recent study of CMOs in 2021 found the following are the most important for determining MROI or ROI. Let's say not even MROI, it's just return on investment. What is the metric that's most important to you? And number 1 was revenue. Number 2 was digital marketing performance because it's a little more tangible. Doesn't mean it's more valuable. It's just more tangible. And that's what we found in this survey was that there's a lot of intangibles with marketing spend, so they want to find ones that are tangible. So through the formulas I just mentioned to you, we can get a revenue tangibility, but here we can also get digital marketing performance through companies like Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, or Snap, whoever it is, will give us that performance metric. And then it's coming out of this, lead generation is number 3. Number 4 is content engagement. We're not talking about impressions. We're talking about engagement. We don't care about impressions for the most part. It could mean anything if we've got an impression, but it's more important if they actually engage with the content we're providing. And so lead generation, and then the next is customer engagement, experience, and then campaign costs, number 5, or the last one rather. So we've got revenue, digital marketing performance, lead generation, content engagement, lead generation, customer engagement, experience, and then campaign costs is the last one. So what I find interesting is, as long as we have the metrics and as long as we can measure and as long as we can show a tangible MROI, what's interesting is campaign cost becomes less of an issue. So it's an important thing to look at. So as you can see, these marketing metrics are important, but you need to understand the formulas around how to determine what your return on investment looks like. So these tangible benefits is of the utmost importance. So when we look at it at Liquid Mind, we work with our brands to set cohesive marketing strategies, activation plans, ongoing investment analysis, and brand equity development and growth determination. These are extremely important as you continue to spend on D2C business with your retailers, the co-ops, whatever it is, to have a tangible analysis of all the different investments you're making across marketing and how to determine that ROI is of the utmost importance, and we're here to support you on that. I want to thank you for listening to the Visionary Chronicles podcast. Realize you have a busy day and appreciate the time you take out each time in listening to our podcast. And if you find the information valuable, where we gain most of our listeners is through you. So if you wouldn't mind passing along the link to the Visionary Chronicles podcast to those who you think may benefit from what we're providing here, whether it be personally or professionally. We're available through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Podbean, iHeart, any of those, they can find the Visionary Chronicles podcast. So again, We gain our followers through you, your support, so we appreciate you. We appreciate your time and look forward to the next episode of the Visionary Chronicles.